Hi, hey, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us on this session of Sheleads in Tech. I am Lydia Igoche, your host and founder, and today I'm pleased to introduce our guest speaker, Maria Lema, co-founder of Weaver Labs. Our mission on this platform is to increase the visibility of women working in tech, and I'm so pleased Maria is here today to discuss the evolution of telecommunications technology with us and to tell us what's been happening in the telecoms tech space through the lens of her career. So welcome, Maria. I'm looking forward to this chat with you today.
Thank you, Lydia. Thank you so much for having me. Really looking forward to it as well, and to tell you my journey and my role in telecoms.
Thank you, Maria. So to get us all a bit relaxed, I know you've been busy today. I'm going to ask a bit of trivia question and to get you started. So can you tell us what your favorite color is?
My favorite color is blue.
Good. I've got your favorite color on today. How coincidental. I did one of these in the past, and myself and one of the co-hosts, we ended up sharing the same favorite color, which was a good thing. So my favorite color is mustard yellow, and it just evokes happiness for me. That's why I like it.
Yes, yeah.
That's good. Well, I'm glad Providence has put me in your favorite color today. So I hope this is sending some joy your way.
Of course, yes.
Okay, so again, for our speakers, our listeners who don't know much about you, or just a bit of preamble and leave the rest of the intro for you to cover. And, we've got lots of questions that's going to deep dive into your experience, and your background will really come through as we discuss that wider topic of evolution of telecoms technology over the last couple of years. So just before we get started, I just want to tell everyone, Maria is the co-founder of Weaver Labs, and Weaver Labs is a company which focuses on enabling communication through the use of secure and shared telecommunications infrastructure. Maria also holds a PhD in telecommunications from KCL, and she is the author of several landmark papers, including one which I particularly like around enabling end-to-end 5G connectivity. So that is a lot of experience, Maria. And one of the questions I like to ask women in the tech space is, how did you get into all of this? So how did you get into wireless communications in the first place?
So just one minor correction. My PhD is from University in Barcelona. I did research at King's, but the university who granted me the PhD is UPC in Barcelona, not King's.
Right. I thought it was KCL.
Yeah, no, I did finish my PhD there, but it was the majority of my time was in Barcelona, UPC. Okay. So how did I get into telecoms? Well, I guess everyone has kind of like a calling, in terms of career calling and stuff. Well, I didn't. For me, it was sheer, I don't know, I guess I wanted to study something that was close to where I lived. And I had three options: agriculture, aeronautics, or telecoms. Yeah. I applied to aeronautics and telecoms, and I did not make the cut for aeronautics. So I ended up in telecoms. Yeah. My brother was doing telecoms at the time, and when I had to choose university studies, I was like, hey, what's this about telecoms? And he's like, yeah, it sounds cool. He was seeing his first year, so didn't get much into it, but I just thought, let's give it a go. Yeah. And that's how I started. Then I really enjoyed it, studying it. I'm a person that, I understand systems. I like systems. Yeah. And I like to explain the behavior of things. That's why I was looking for an engineering career. So I guess telecoms gave me that. I loved physics as well. And I did radio communications. And then my PhD is basically on system level improvement for uplink communications in 5G, or 4G and then 5G. Yeah. So a lot of electronics and physics and of course system design. So I guess I learned how to enjoy it and love it throughout the 5 years of university, so much that I decided to stay in university 5 more years. So yeah.
That is interesting. And in that point of deciding what you wanted to do, was it always a focus on telecommunications you started with, or did you start from a broader wireless communication radio tech base and then later you zeroed in on the telecommunications aspect? Was that how it worked, or was it always telecoms from the beginning?
So I mean, from since I was kind of like identifying what I wanted to do with my life, I understood that I wanted a career in tech. Yeah. I felt that my way of thinking was closer to a tech type of career, a scientific type of career, yeah, rather than something outside of science, because I felt really comfortable with that. And then once I started my university studies, it went from very, generic physics in terms of radio, a lot of microwave electronics, all the way down into systems, and then how those systems were integrated in the form of telecommunication systems. So it was always with the objective of finishing understanding what a telecommunications network is, but always from the perspective of the wireless network. So I didn't get too specialized in fixed networks, a little bit on optical, but not too much, in terms of, network protocols and stuff like that. There are people that know a lot more than I do. My area of expertise, it's more like, 3GPP standard bodies, and studied, 3G, and then did my PhD in 4G and 5G. So very much radio access networks for 3GPP standards bodies. And then, of course, once you are in your professional life takes you here and there. And then I moved on to more operational roles where I've been working on implementation of systems. So once I left my career in academia, I was more hands-on in terms of delivering networks on the street. So more on the implementation side, very much cloud-based. So then I went all the way up to infrastructure and other things, but always telecoms, yes.
Yeah, well, no, that's so good. And the reason I asked that question is that personally, I have a similar background to you, starting out in physics and then doing, all of the typical MSc stuff where you have the broad modules again. And then I wanted to understand if, there was that intent from the beginning to always come into telecoms, because I know from personal experience, that's not how it starts out typically. And a second reason I asked that question is to try to help people shape their intent. So if people like you have that interest of, systems and wireless communication, whether there was maybe a simpler route to try to narrow down to a focus area rather than doing that broad-based topic exposure, which is a good thing for general understanding, but not very much for specializing into a specific field. So that's why I asked that question. And I also wanted to ask how your research interest, building on, when you went from your MSc into your PhD, that for the 5 years of lonely PhD life you decided to embark on. I mean, how did it start to play out in terms of, research interest versus industry applications. You mentioned 3GPP standards. How did that start to intersect for you?
So I guess when I finished my master's, I did a master's in entrepreneurship and management. And I also did an extension to the telecom studies where I did more like in-depth study of systems and instrumentation and other stuff. So I guess I was young and I had to go and look for a job. And then I thought like, oh my God, I'm going to be working for a company until I'm 67. And I'm very young and I still have so much to learn.
Yeah.
And I guess I liked university a lot. I liked to learn. I was good at it. I was good at learning things. And I also met a woman who I admired a lot. And I saw her as someone I would look up to, and someone that I would want to have a similar career as her. And she had a PhD in telecoms and was, lecturing. She was a lecturer. And in one of my last exams that I had with her, I just remember going and handing her over my exam and saying, like, I want to work with you. And I knew that she was running an innovation lab in the university, and she had some, some internships. So I was always working while I was doing my studies. And at the time I was working in Agilent Technologies, working on testing devices. So before it was Hewlett-Packard, selling oscilloscopes and spectrum analyzers to researchers. And it was a very much sales type of role.
Yeah.
And when I talked to Sylvia about like working with her, she proposed to me to join the lab and work on a research project, which was also sponsored by the industry. At that time was Abertis Telecom, and it was around digital television, so DVB-T, DVB-T2. That was when all of these standards were coming out, and I truly enjoyed working in that environment of, they threw me a problem, I had to develop solutions for it. And present those solutions, because at the end of the day, we had a private sector sponsor, so we had to show solutions. We worked on a project consortium. We had project meetings and stuff like that. So it was I enjoyed it a lot. And by the time I finished my master's, while I was working there as an intern, I got offered a full-time position in the university to continue doing the same kind of research work that I was doing, no PhD involved. And I think I was very clear when they offered me that. I was like, I have no intention on doing a PhD. I'm just here to do research and then go. And I was looking for a job at the same time. And I remember I interviewed for Vodafone and big telco companies. And when I had the to make a decision, do I leave the university or do I go to industry? I thought what the industry was offering was incredibly boring. It was not stimulating my mind. It was very much streamline of work. I was fit in a little box, and give me work from, someone gives you work and then you hand it over to someone else, and there you are in that little box. I'm not trying to say that people who work for the industry are in boxes. Now I work in the industry and it's not the same. But at that time, being so junior, I had very little freedom to decide like what I wanted to do in those big companies. And the offers that I was getting were very limited in terms of creativity, whereas the other role that I had was immensely creative, working with the entire planet, traveling a lot, and very, very, very creative and nurturing. So it was no brainer for me. And then at some point it was like a natural next step to enroll a PhD, because I was already doing a bunch of research. So why not get a title for that? And then and for that, my supervisor was kind of like, he really made a case for me, saying like, but you're publishing, you're doing research, why don't you like get that title and commit to it, and I did. And I agree with you that it's a lonely path, but it is lonely because of how academic research is constructed, not because the researchers themselves want to make it lonely. It is a very enriched opportunity, you know, like you travel all across the planet, you meet so many people, and it is culturally very also enriched, right? Because I've met people from everywhere, whereas sitting in an office in a company as a junior employee might have not been the case. And that was the reason why I left academic research as well. It's the construction around the research that it was not aligned with my personal interests anymore.
I did find one of your talks you did at KCL very interesting, because you were talking about the academic drive to publish papers instead of, you know, that drive to collaborate with industry and you know, really make an impact from research into what's happening to shape the evolution of technology. And I sort of got that sense that you are passionate about bringing the two together. So using the brain power we've got in research, because you cited that, you know, we've got lots of students available at all different levels, not just at the PhD level, that can be really driving innovation. But like you said, in academia, the approach is time box, because we or people need to be measured by the volume of and quality of publications. And then in industry, we're also driven by targets around specific projects, and not necessarily a marrying of the two perspectives. So is there a way you overcame that challenge? Because it seemed you were able to bring those two aspects together between the work you did in your research and what you have done and are still doing in industry now. So how did you get around that?
Well, I didn't. That's why I left.
Okay.
But I did have a lot of fun before that. And I think we did find a good commitment between the two, or a good way for research or academia and industry to work together. And that was my time at King's. So at King's College, I met an incredible set of people who were very much like me in that sense, wanted to show the world that how we could disrupt the telecoms industry by bringing together the industry and bringing the industry to academia. Academic institutions don't have a commercial interest or a commercial outcome, so we can take risks and we can push things to the boundaries. And often, you know, industry invests in academia just to do that. And I was lucky enough to work with Ericsson on the 5G tactile internet lab at King's College London, and there we were given the task of answering the question of why we needed 5G, and that was pure joy, because we had to find the industries that really needed the use of telecoms to solve business problems and actually embrace digital transformation. So we worked with healthcare, with entertainment, you know, like theaters, automotive sector, manufacturing, all of these interesting industries who had loads of problems that could be solved with technology. And the underlying element or enabler of that digital transformation was networks, because networks transmit data, and data is it's the new oil, right? It's what actually provides value. So King's and Ericsson together, that combination, that partnership really proved that could be done, that we could actually push the boundaries and collaborate industry and academia and show how you know, the industry can evolve, or how things can look like in maybe 10 years from now. because that's our role from academia. However, in academia, that's not very well perceived, right? Because the KPIs for a researcher are different. It's not how many headlines you've made on the media. It's not how many talks you've done about that, how many demos you have, or how many industry partners have you onboarded. It's how many papers have you published, and in what's the impact factor, what's your H factor, and so on and so forth, and so how many grants. And so there's no career path defined for people who want to do this in academia. And at some point you get into a ceiling, right? It's like, okay, so what do I do now? Should I continue doing this forever? Or should I just try and find another thing that fulfills me as well? And I guess that was for me the break-even point where I had to make the decision of, or should I stay, or should I go? What do I do? But yeah, I think King's and the partnership with Ericsson was extremely helpful for the 5G industry, at least in the UK.
Thank you, Maria. So you mentioned 5G and tactile internet there, which is part of the questions I've got to ask you to explain simply. But before 5G, what other telecommunications technologies did you work with, either in your research or industry experience?
So I started basically with LTE, long-term evolution, 4G, well, 3.9, first release 8, long-term evolution, and then release 10, 11, 12, which was more LTE advanced, and the actual implementation of 4G. And then as a matter of evolution, I continued with 4G. So those are the two, with 5G. Those are the two that I've spent the majority of my life working.
No, that's really good. And for 5G tactile, is that a different use case for 5G, or is this a separate category of 5G itself?
Not really. I think what tactile internet was meaning to address is just that instant action reaction through the internet, right? Being able to transmit the sense of touch requires a certain level of quality of service over the network that we didn't have before. So that sub-millisecond latency, that ultra high bandwidth, and ultra reliable communication. So that's kind of like that very niche number of use cases that would require the transmission of the sense of touch. It's not, I would say, a standard or a family of standard. It was more like a movement at that time that was actually triggering certain elements that were needed to be able to transmit the sense of touch over the internet. And the team at King's did an excellent job, which I was not involved in that work, but there was a lot of work done, for example, in codecs for codifying tactile information. Definition of requirements for the tactile transmission is not the same tactile than kinesthetic. So it was more like a label of, creating the next generation of the internet, where we can transmit skills and give an extra sense to the human being through the internet, because now we can see and we can hear. But what about if we want to touch? And then there were a large number of use cases that would benefit from that, right? So we have the surgeons and the medical doctors who are, exploring patients and constantly using their hands, and great part of their expertise resides on their hands, right? And sometimes the success of a procedure would largely be determined based on the ability to touch certain tissue or the stiffness of that tissue. So there has been a lot of work in the robotics department in terms of creating those sensors that would allow the doctor to measure that sense of touch and then we would bring in the internet component so that we could actually separate the man from the machine.
Yeah.
To perform that operation. So I guess the term tactile internet, it refers to the possibility of the family of use cases, but also the certain level of KPIs the network needs to be, compliant to. But also there is a whole lot of other things, like as I mentioned, codecs and the devices and so on and so forth. So it's a whole world in itself.
Yeah, and I was going to follow and say, is that use case for tactile internet the only driver driving the push for 5G adoption, or are there other use cases that are driving the adoption and evolution from 4G to 5G?
Well, I think definitely not. Tactile internet it hasn't driven adoption in 5G and potentially won't. I guess the work that we were doing with regards to tactile internet and pushing the boundaries, as I said, is like shoot for the stars and create these crazy level use cases that can demonstrate what technology can achieve. But of course, we're not thinking about robots operating anytime soon, or robots operating remotely. Robots are operating right now, but there is what you can achieve with technology, and that's what we were bringing from academic research. And then the other thing is that, okay, what can we be doing right now in the short term? So when I have to think about 5G adoption, it is a difficult question, because there is a whole component of, or a whole argument around commercial and business models and investment that needs to be done. And that question hasn't been really answered yet. And a large number of use cases that we can use today can be very well done with 4G, with a good 4G private network, or a more reliable 4G network. 4G is great, or even Wi-Fi or other sets of technologies. I think that the adoption of 5G is accelerating just because of the access to spectrum that we have, shared spectrum access, and Ofcom has opened up spectrum for that. And that is definitely driving adoption in a number of use cases, because it's easier. And also the other thing that is driving adoption in 5G is the softwareization and the fact that the telecoms industry is becoming more IT based or cloud based. And a lot of the efforts are being put into 5G and not precisely on 4G, just simply because it's an evolution of the standard. But yeah, in terms of adoption outside of the obvious, which is mobile broadband, our phones and the customer and the consumer network, which is always set to evolve. Most of these use cases that we see today are not really consuming the level of bandwidth and latencies that 5G can offer. But we will see that coming in the future, of course, as we see adoption gaining. But if you have to ask me, what is the industry that probably is adopting 5G the most, or it is benefiting from 5G the most, I would say the transport industry. And yeah, because it requires an outdoor connectivity with, an open spectrum, which 5G fulfills that. Sometimes it requires high data rates and low latencies. So yeah. Then manufacturing was another one discussed a lot, but then there is a lot of Wi-Fi in that realm as well. So
yeah, well, that's good. And where does the work with lab pioneers fit into the mix of trying to enable communications and connectivity in the telecom space?
So Weaver Labs was born essentially to cover that side of the equation that was not being asked in terms of adoption. It's like what is preventing connectivity in general to be adopted? We have all these technologies. We know how to shoot for the stars, and we know how to make robots operate remotely, theoretically. I mean, I'm pretty sure that to do it at scale, we need to do a lot more of due diligence on that. But the point is that we have proven that the technology can deliver those use cases, but we haven't proven the business case. And the business case, it always ended up in the question of who's going to pay for this, for this network. And then understanding the market, what we saw was that there were a large number of players who wanted to invest in telecoms infrastructure outside of the classic mobile network operators. But the motivations or the commercial interests for those players to invest in telecoms infrastructure were not precisely, enhanced broadband connectivity. So what it would end up, what we would see is that we would end up in a future scenario where infrastructure was going to be built by a larger number of players, so that the supply chain was going to be diversified in terms of the actors who contribute telecoms infrastructure. And you needed something that allowed to knit together all of that infrastructure so that it could be consumed easily. Because if I go to a city and I am a smart city application and I want to connect my sensors in the whole geography of the city, but I have infrastructure that it's owned by A, B, C, D, E, it's kind of like a barrier for me as a supplier of a service to go and have to talk to 5 different suppliers, right? So in this case, our software integrates all of these telecoms infrastructure that initially exists in silos and opens it up to be consumed as a service. So what we see is that our software facilitates the integration of neutral hosting with mobile network operator infrastructure, and it empowers infrastructure as a service to be used. And infrastructure sharing models, right? So build once and have multiple players sharing that infrastructure. So that is the problem that we're trying to tackle from Weaver Labs, and all very much based on the evolution of networks, and that now they're cloud-based, and a layer of software can actually do that.
And does that linking of different operator system create any concerns about security?
Well, we have an implementation of zero trust security on our platform. So that means that whereas before integration of networks would be based on perimeter models. So my perimeter is my domain, and then I would connect to your network, and we have a human-based agreement so we can interconnect this network. So in the zero trust, what you do is you shrink that perimeter model to your individual elements of the network, and then you have your authenticate everywhere, know your devices, and and monitor and meter everything that is going on in the network. So supposedly zero trust it's going to mitigate those concerns of interconnectivity across multiple domains.
Oh, thank you so much. So we've gone through a lot in you talking about your experience, and I particularly liked that linking between your experience in 4G and how it evolved into your research and contribution in the 5G space. So to bring things to a close, because again, technology is still evolving. 5G is still in the, I would say, starting phase of adoption and rollout. But is this where it all ends with 5G, or is there even more network evolution on the horizon?
Oh my God. Of course, there is going to be a 6G for sure. Like we are already seeing the academic institutions talking about it and starting to shape the use cases and the requirements for that. So of course there is going to be more evolution, and this is just the beginning of the great things that are to come in the telecom sector, right? Because as I said, we underpin everything that goes on top, right? And wireless networks power the economy in ways that, you know, we can't imagine. And it's not one standard, it's not going to solve all of our problems. So it's not about 5G or 6G or whatever, it's about the combination of all the tools and assets that we have. So we're also seeing a strong push from satellite communications. So last week I was in CW Tech and I heard incredible talks about the evolution of satellite communications, and I'm quite excited about seeing what's going on there. We have all the evolution of industry, IoT, and also IoT for smart cities, and, you know, low power wide area networks, and the use of you know, small data and maybe not reliable, but you know, those devices need to be sending. So 5G is an overkill for that. So IoT technology, what role does it play in all of this, and how do we integrate all of that? So I guess in terms of evolution, definitely there is going to be more. I hope there is more, because otherwise it's going to be too boring. And I guess one of the challenges that we're seeing now is how do we make all of this work together?
Yes. Yeah, no, that's really, really good. And I had to ask that question to you, as someone being in research, and just wondering if there's a natural point where everyone gets to a point and we say, no, you know, everything stays steady state for X number of years. But as you said, that wouldn't be the case, because 6G is already being invented as we speak, and hopefully it's something we can talk about a bit more maybe in the future episode to see what that holds and what some of the key themes coming out of the research space for 6G is, which is going to be very exciting. But for today, I just want to say thank you so much for such a good conversation and engaging interview. And, you know, thank you for giving your time here to give us an insight into what you've done and contributed in the tech space. And I'm sure it will be was certainly useful for me to hear about your background. I know many people would find this conversation inspirational as they think of their own individual career plans as women in tech. So thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you for having me and such interesting questions.
No worries. Thank you, Maria.
Bye.
Bye.